She didn't betray you. She just played a game you never knew you were in. While you were writing poems in your head, she was reading your silences like a strategist reading a weak formation. You thought love was enough, but Machiavelli would have called it negligence. This isn't about blame, it's about blueprint. Most men think loyalty is a virtue until it's the reason they're left clinging to a version of her that never really existed. You weren't betrayed by her body. You were betrayed by your own fantasy. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just rearranges you, quietly, completely. And when she left, it wasn't her absence that broke you. It was what her absence revealed, that you never knew the rules. You just assumed she was playing the same game. Let's be clear, this isn't revenge content, it's a reckoning, a mirror held up to your emotional operating system. You didn't lose her because you were too emotional, too weak, too good. You lost her because you mistook strategy for sincerity, and she didn't. Now you stand in the aftermath, not just of a breakup, but of a philosophical collapse, not of love, but of your illusions about what it means to be a man in a game no one warned you about. He thought loyalty would earn him victory, that if he just stayed, silent, steady, sacrificial, love would repay him in kind. But the battlefield didn't ask for his devotion. It demanded discernment, and he showed up with blind faith. Now all that remains is the echo of a throne he built for someone who never wanted to rule beside him. No one tells a man that sometimes loyalty is cowardice in disguise, that he stayed not out of strength, but out of fear of seeing the truth, because if he questioned her, he'd lose the illusion, and illusions are warmer than cold beds. He wasn't being honorable. He was bargaining with his own abandonment wound. The Machiavellian mind never assumes alignment. It verifies it. It watches not what she says in comfort, but what she does in crisis. Yet he ignored every flicker of misalignment, because to see her clearly would mean admitting she never fought to stay. And if she didn't fight, was she ever truly with him? Men like him carry a fracture beneath their armor, a childhood script that says, if I'm good enough, they'll stay. But goodness was never the currency of this game. It was weight, presence, strategy, and he showed up with a confession instead of a contract. He believed loyalty made him king, but loyalty without shared code is just self-abandonment in royal robes. He kept giving ground, hoping she'd build with him, but she saw a kingdom with no walls and walked through, never intending to stay. She didn't betray him. She simply followed her nature, a nature he never studied. Machiavelli warned, "The wise man never lacks caution." Yet he mistook sacrifice for sovereignty, and in doing so, crowned himself a martyr in a war she never declared. Ask any man who's loved from his knees, and he'll tell you, there's a silence deeper than heartbreak. It's the silence of realizing your loyalty meant nothing, not because she was cruel, but because she never asked for it. You offered a vow to someone who only signed a visit. So he must now bury not just her absence, but his own illusion of nobility. Loyalty is a sword, yes, but if you hold it by the blade, it only cuts you. And she simply walked away, untouched by the war he imagined. He thought opening up would bring them closer. He didn't realize he was handing over weapons, not truths. Each confession became leverage, each tear a silent permission to be overruled. And what he called connection, she learned to call control. There's a kind of wound that teaches boys that feelings are currency, that if they expose their pain, they'll finally be seen. But women don't always respect what's revealed. Some only study it, catalog it, and wait. Wait for the moment it becomes useful. He didn't know how to conceal his edge. He thought that intimacy required nakedness. But Machiavelli would have smirked. To show your whole hand is not honesty, it's surrender. And she didn't fall for his soul, and she mapped it. This isn't about becoming stone, it's about becoming sovereign. A man must know when to speak and when to withhold. Not out of deceit, but out of design. Not every woman deserves your raw. He called it being real. But realness without filters is just bleed. You don't pour wine on the ground and call it offering. You don't spill your grief at every touch and call it intimacy. He didn't open his heart. He dismantled his defenses. In quiet moments, he'd feel her pulling away, not because he wasn't enough, but because he was too visible. The mystique was gone. The chase ended. He mistook her growing cold as betrayal, but the truth, he left no mystery to burn for. A woman might admire your openness once, but repeat it too easily, too often, and it stops feeling sacred. He mistook her comfort for connection. He forgot that power doesn't beg to be understood. It reveals itself in layers. She didn't get bored. She got full. He thought he was being vulnerable. But vulnerability, when misread, becomes a silent collapse. You think she'll cherish your truth, but if you haven't earned her reverence, she'll just resent your rawness. And that's how the drawbridge became a coffin. She praised him, and that's when he stopped looking. The moment she said, "You're different," he stopped asking. Different from what? Flattery became the lullaby, and his instincts, once sharp, began to sleep. There's a kind of praise that feels like prophecy. It doesn't just affirm you, it replaces your doubt. She said the right things at the right times, with the right tone, and he took it as truth instead of strategy, because men raised on emotional starvation mistake warmth for worth. He never asked what her compliments concealed. Machiavelli warned, "Flattery disarms even the strongest." It's not affection, it's anesthesia. She didn't need to manipulate him, she just needed to admire him. A little. Men who never felt seen will trade discernment for recognition. He ignored the delays, the contradictions, the quiet red flags. She said, "I've never met anyone like you." And that was enough to blind him to everything she didn't say. His pride became the puppet. Compliments can be currency or camouflage, and the truth is, she was never confirming him. She was watching what he needed to hear. And once she learned his hunger, she fed it just enough to keep him compliant. He thought her praise made him powerful, but real power doesn't need applause. It needs alignment. She didn't admire his mission. She admired his malleability, and the moment he noticed, he couldn't unsee it. Charisma without clarity is quicksand. You feel the embrace before you see the exit. He was blindfolded with admiration. Not because he was stupid, but because he was starving. And when you're starving, even poison tastes holy. She didn't lie to him. She just told him what he wanted to believe. And he believed it, because his instincts had been muted by approval. He wasn't deceived by her. He was deceived by the sound of his own unmet need. He stayed because hope is louder than reality. Because she used to laugh that way. Because once, just once, she looked at him like he mattered, and so he waited. Not for her return, but for a feeling that had already died. Hope is beautiful and brutal. It turns scraps into altars. It makes a delayed text feel like resurrection. He thought patience would prove his worth, but all it did was drag him further from clarity. She wasn't promising him anything, but he kept interpreting her silences as tests, as if surviving neglect would earn him intimacy. This is how intermittent affection works. It keeps you chasing a ghost wearing her face. Machiavelli would have laughed. To trust without proof is not virtue, it's suicide. She was gone long before her body left. But he still clung to her shadow, because letting go meant admitting he'd been wrong about everything. He kept remembering the beginning, the soft moments, the sacred firsts, the hunger in her eyes. But nostalgia is a drug. It edits the ending, retouches the cruelty, and overdoses on what could have been. He wasn't loyal to her, he was loyal to a memory. She wasn't lying, she simply stopped investing, and he kept paying the bill. He read her breadcrumbs like sacred texts. He called her confused. But confusion doesn't ghost you. Indifference does. You don't lose yourself in her absence. You lose yourself when you stop asking what's real. He chased a version of her that no longer existed. And in doing so, he missed the obvious truth. She had already walked through the gates. He was guarding ruins. This isn't a story of betrayal. It's a story of perception. He hoped she'd come back, but the woman he wanted never even stayed. And when hope becomes a religion, you stop noticing when the gods stop answering. He kept apologizing, not because he was wrong, but because silence scared him more than guilt. She'd shift her tone, pull back, change shape, and he'd rush to make peace with a war he didn't start. But you can't repair what was designed to crack. His apology wasn't a bridge. It was a surrender note. Every time he said, "I'm sorry," he lost a little more of himself. Not because he was weak, but because he thought peace was more important than truth. Machiavelli warned, "A prince who capitulates loses respect." She didn't need to punish him. He punished himself. He handed her the sword and then knelt beneath it. That wasn't love. That was learned obedience. There's a kind of man who believes love means never letting her be upset. So he folds, shrinks, adapts, and calls it maturity. But apologies without alignment don't fix fractures. They widen them. He said sorry for his tone, for his timing, for her discomfort, but he never stopped to ask, "Why am I the only one repenting in a two-person story?" And that silence rotted everything. She learned that his guilt was currency, that if she withheld warmth long enough, he'd pay in contrition. It wasn't manipulation, it was education. He taught her what to expect, and she mastered the pattern. He thought he was healing the rift. But apologies made without self-respect don't restore connection. They dissolve credibility. You become the man who always blinks first. And once she sees that, the game shifts. His final apology wasn't spoken. It was lived in how he gave up his standards to keep the illusion alive. She didn't forgive him. She forgave the version of him that broke himself to earn her calm. And then she left him for someone who didn't apologize for existing. He didn't lie. He just never spoke. When she shifted, grew distant, withheld affection, he said nothing, called it maturity. But silence isn't peace. It's the graveyard where your voice goes to die. He thought avoiding conflict made him noble, that if he stayed composed, she'd return to warmth. But Jung would say, the things we don't say don't vanish. They fester in the shadow until they scream through breakdowns. Machiavelli knew, the unspoken is always weaponized. She began defining the story. Not because she was cruel, but because he left the script blank. And in war, the one who writes the narrative wins. He thought, if I speak, I'll lose her. But silence doesn't preserve love. It erodes identity. Every moment he bit his tongue, he taught her that his boundaries were negotiable, and a man without boundaries becomes background noise. When men confuse stillness with strategy, they lose. Stillness is chosen. Silence is submission. She kept pushing, not to destroy him, but to see if anything inside him would push back. He let her lead the emotional landscape. If she was cold, he adjusted. If she was warm, he praised. But she wasn't leading out of desire. She was leading because no one else was. And nothing repels the feminine more than a man who won't take the wheel. He believed silence was strength. But strength isn't mute. It's measured. He could have spoken with calm, with clarity, with edge. Instead, he disappeared in plain sight. And by the time he tried to speak, the stage was empty. She didn't leave him because he yelled. She left because he never spoke. Not about the weight, the resentment, the fracture. And so she sculpted the truth without him, because when you don't use your voice, someone else will use it for you. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. He thought love was the reward, that once she said yes, the trials were over. But relationships don't end at the beginning. They begin at the first test of weight. And when it came, he didn't carry it. He collapsed. Machiavelli was clear. A prince is tested by deeds, not words. But he believed affection was enough. That showing up was the same as standing firm. She watched him closely, not when he was adored, but when he was challenged. He mistook love for permission. Permission to stop evolving. Permission to soften his standards. But the feminine doesn't crave stasis. She craves tension, the kind that strengthens, not snaps. Every relationship is a proving ground, not for dominance, but for presence. Will you show up when it's inconvenient? Will you hold frame when the storm hits? Or will you plead, shrink, overcorrect? She tested him, not with drama, but with distance. A quiet withdrawal, a subtle shift, and instead of rising, he reacted, not as a leader, but as a boy trying to win back his mother. He called her difficult, but she wasn't difficult. She was disillusioned, because the man she met was sovereign, and the man she stayed with was slowly dissolving. One compromise at a time. He thought love meant he could stop proving, but commitment isn't a trophy, it's a threshold. And every time he broke his word to himself, she saw it. Not always with anger, sometimes just with silence. She didn't leave because he changed. She left because he stopped earning her presence. Trust isn't given, it's maintained. And the test he failed wasn't hers, it was the one he never gave himself. He told himself he missed her, but what he really missed was the part of himself that believed in her. He wasn't grieving her departure. He was grieving the narrative he built and now had to burn. She was never the story, she was just the mirror. The truth is, he never learned the rules, not because they were hidden, but because he never looked. Machiavelli didn't write about feelings, he wrote about leverage, and leverage unstudied becomes fate. He didn't lose her. He lost to the game he never trained for. Every man wants to believe love is noble, that loyalty earns loyalty, that depth attracts depth. But Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And fate for him looked a lot like silent rejection. He never read the signs because he was too busy writing poetry in a war zone, too busy projecting virtue where strategy was needed. She moved on, not because she was evil, but because he never knew what kept her anchored. He offered soul. She wanted structure. His grief is sacred, but it isn't for her. It's for the king he never became, for the moments he bent instead of breaking the cycle, for the days he hoped instead of asking hard questions. It's the ruin of a man who never learned to rule himself. He loved her potential, but love without awareness becomes obsession, and obsession is grief in drag, a refusal to bury the fantasy, a refusal to admit, I didn't lose her. I lost the illusion of being enough by default. She didn't play unfair. She just didn't play the game he imagined. While he waited for virtue to reward him, she aligned with something more real. Power, presence, perception. And now he mourns. Not her departure, but his delay. You don't grieve her. You grieve the handbook you never wrote, the rules you never questioned, the sovereignty you abandoned. She was just the final exam for a course you never studied. She didn't steal anything. She revealed the truth, brutally, silently, perfectly, that what you called love was just unexamined longing, disguised as destiny. She wasn't your destruction, she was your diagnosis. Jung reminds us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you pretended to be in her arms, not the version of you that walked on eggshells, apologized for breathing, or begged silence to become affection, but the man beneath the masks, even if he had to be shattered to be seen. Nietzsche once said, sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed, but the illusion is what cost you. The illusion that she would stay if you stayed soft. The illusion that sacrifice guaranteed safety. The illusion that loyalty was enough to be chosen. This wasn't her betrayal. It was yours. Of your discernment, of your masculine edge, of the kingdom you let collapse to keep her comfortable. She didn't manipulate you. She simply played the role you left vacant. You let her lead, define, sculpt, and silence. Because deep down, You feared that leading would mean losing her. But the truth? You lost her by forfeiting your post. The game wasn't lost when she pulled away. It was lost when you stopped paying attention, when you traded presence for performance, conviction for comfort, and thought love meant being predictable instead of being powerful. She didn't expose your weakness. She exposed the architecture of your untested beliefs, the ones that told you devotion is enough, words matter more than energy, and peace is better than truth. But now you get to rewrite. You don't rebuild by reclaiming her. You rebuild by reclaiming your own code. A man is not made in the keeping. He's made in the losing, not when he collapses, but when he stands again, no longer mistaking affection for agreement. What if everything you were chasing in her was just the part of you you never protected? What if the love you thought you lost was only ever a mirror, reflecting back the sovereignty you abandoned? Don't fixate on her absence. Ask yourself, what version of me allowed this? What boundaries did I trade for harmony? What instincts did I mute just to feel wanted? And more importantly, what would it look like to never do that again? You don't need to become colder. You need to become clear. You don't need to avoid women. You need to stop confusing chemistry with chaos. And you don't need her back. You need yourself back. Mourn if you must, but mourn with fire. Because this isn't the end. It's the autopsy, the post-mortem of a man who needed a fall to finally rise. And from now on, you don't get played by rules you never agreed to. So I ask you, will you keep orbiting her memory? Or will you build a mind so sovereign she becomes irrelevant to your becoming? If this cracked something open in you, don't just watch. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue this journey of brutal self-knowledge and emotional freedom. Before you rebuild, understand this: she wasn't loyal to you. She was loyal to the version of you that served her advantage. In the next video, we dissect the loyalty you mistook for love and the Machiavellian price of not seeing the shift.